Hi, my name is Megan Steinmetz, and this was my dissection of a sheep brain. So I began by facing my brain dorsal side up, and then I was able to identify the dura mater and the meninges. As you can see that mark right there, I tried to tear out the layers, but there were none present, so that's what that mark was. So I was able to identify the sulci and the guri, which are the grooves and the ridges. I then looked at the cerebrum and I identified the medial longitudinal fissure, and then I began to identify the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, which are these, and then inferior to the parietal lobe we have the temporal lobe, which is where my finger's at, and then the dorsal side of the cerebrum we have the occipital lobes. And then I went to the cerebrum, or the little brain as I like to call it, this area right in here. This would be the viscerum, which is that central dividing line. And if I look into the frontal part of the brain, I can see where the olfactory bulb would be, and also where the optic chiasm would be, which is the area right there where my thumb is at. And I can also see the spinal cord located right there, and the medulla and the pons. The medulla is really important. It's responsible for our breathing and for our heart rate. And then anterior, like I said, was the pons, which is those nerve tracts that connect. So the first cut that I made was that medial longitudinal fissure line, creating a sagittal view, creating also two halves to the brain, and then each hemisphere has 4 ventricles. The first and second I wasn't able to locate since they are behind the septum parallelum, which would be this area right in here. The third ventricle is located dorsal to the thalamus, so it's this area right in here where my probe is at. And then the fourth ventricle is right here in between the spinal cord and the cerebellum, where I'm running my probe right now. Looking at the central of the brain, there is the thalamus right there, and that is our sensory relay center. Inferior is the hypothalamus, right down in there, which is responsible for internal homeostasis. Posterior to the thalamus is the pineal gland right in there, which secretes melatonin and keeps us happy. Here is the sagittal view again of the medulla and the pons and the midbrain, something that I didn't mention before. And if we go and focus in on the cerebellum, we can see, if it focuses, we can see a tree-like pattern. This was perhaps the most interesting to me, just because I found the other structures very hard to distinguish. And in that tree pattern, we can see the arbor vitae within the white matter. And then for my final cut that I made, it would have been just a single slice anterior to the thalamus. And this was the slice that exposed the white matter and the cerebral cortex. And this is where our conscious thoughts and actions take place. So I also found that very interesting. And that is what I concluded in my lab.